Okay everybody, this is Birdie. I know you can't see me. We're going to be working on my table here. We're going to be making the tree block for them from this Birch Gnomes, because we made the quilt already and now we're going to do the table runner. So I need 2 trees, but this is what you need for 1 tree. It tells you what to cut them at. And so I'm going to go in and start cutting where I want my branches to be. So you can make as many or as few branches as you want. So, but you really need to make all of your cuts for all of your branches. And so I'm going to start with the one on the left, and I'm going to make, so that's my first cut. And that's, since it's coming off of the main tree, that's going to be a wide, it's going to, I'll use my 1.5 inch strip, and that's going to go in there. And then I'm going to make a branch coming off. Let's make it go down. We'll do a branch coming off the side, and I'm gonna go down with that one. So that'll be a small branch. Then I'm gonna come down here, and I'm gonna do another one from the center, and that'll be a wide branch because it's coming off the main part of the tree. And then I'll do a branch, a smaller one right here. Did I go? Oh, I did. Okay. So I can either work from the top down or I can work from the bottom. I'm gonna work from the bottom, and you've got to think of this like it is a puzzle, because that's what we've made it into now. So before I can sew this seam, I need to sew this seam because that's going to be sewn together. So first thing I'm going to do is right here I'm going to be sewing a 1 inch strip. So I'm going to just place my strip, and this is all frayed because this is all leftover fabric from the quilt, and it's been handled quite a bit, but all that'll get trimmed off. So, and you know me, I pin everything. So I'm going to pin this like this, right sides together. I'm going to come to my machine, and I'm going to sew that seam, 1/4 inch seam right where I pinned. I've got it sewn, that seam, and before I cut it, I'm going to press it. So I like to finger press, and I have a great little tool that I like to use for this. Here it is. We sell these, but they're the plastic version. It's basically a tool that I use if I do paper piecing, but you might recognize it if you do any wallpapering at home. This is the tool that you use to flatten your seams when you wallpaper, but it works really well for this. So you can see I've got a good press on that now. So I'm going to take my ruler, and this is the part that people I think might get confused. Move this out of the way. But so I pressed it, and I pressed it towards the inside. That's okay. So I'm going to go with the angle of my cut, and I'm going to slice it right there. Then I'm going to come to the outside edge, and we're just going to cut that off as well. There's that. So the next thing I do is I'm going to be sewing this piece on. So again, I'm going to put it, you can match up that edge, and I'm going to pin it. And there's going to be that little hangover, but that's what you get when you're working with these angles. So let me sew that seam. And I'm making all my seams 1/4 inch. So, and you're starting with a 1 inch strip for these, thinner branches. So when it's finished, it's supposed to be right around 1/2 inch. Okay, so I'm going to come back, and I'm going to press that again, and use my little roller. And there's the first seam, the first branch. And if this didn't line up so perfectly on this one, I would take my ruler, and I can always double check it. You want an absolute straight edge because that's easy, and it's off teeny tiny bit, no big deal. So I'm just going to trim that excess. Okay. So now, since this is the branch that's coming off of my tree trunk, I'm going to use the 1.5 inch strip. And I'm going to sew this. And I leave a little bit extra because when you flip it out, you're not certain, you know, if you need that excess or not. But, and then I always pin where my seams are. Okay, go back to my machine. I'm going to sew that seam again 1/4 inch, and you never trim the strip until you get it pressed out. Okay, so press it this way, and again I do my little finger press, come in and press it. And then I trim again, and you'll know which way to trim because you've got this edge here, and so you want to keep that a straight edge. So there's that. And then on this one, you're just going to trim it the same angle of this piece. So put my ruler there and give it a cut. Okay, and then the next thing I do, now this piece is ready to be sewn on. And you could tell it's a little bit longer, and that's because you've added fabric and whatnot. But I want to make sure that my puzzle is still looking, yeah, so this is gonna, and I'm gonna line it up. And you're gonna have more excess on either end of this, and that's because you've just added fabric to this, so it looks like it's not gonna fit right. But wait and see. I can press this one. And again, I always give it a little finger press first. Okay. Again, I'm going to trim this. And then this one, again, I'm still going to follow this angle of my starting to look like tree branches. Okay, then you get a little confused as to what you're going to be doing next. This is a main one, so that gets a wider thing. But before I can sew that, it's kind of logical. I mean, I can't sew these together until I get this. So I'm going to take my 1 inch piece of fabric, and we're going to put that here. And press this, finger press. Give it a good press. I'm ready to cut again. And now on here I'm following this edge. So give that a slice. And now I've got my outside edge. Okay. Now I'm ready to put this piece in place. And I always, when you're doing this, you know that when you flip this over, like if I had a seam here, let me see if I can explain this. I'm going to put a pin in it where the seam would be, just to give you an idea of when it flips out. So you know when you're working with angles like this, you don't want to put the tip next to this. You've got to give your little bit of extra so that it lines up when you're making your straight seam or whatever. So that's why I always, you know, it's the 1/4 inch that hangs over when you're working with different angles and whatnot. So, and if it's not exactly a 1/4 inch, you're going to be fine because you wind up trimming this down and it'll all work out. I'm going to flip it. I can press that one out. Okay. So finger press, and you're like, oh my gosh, what happened? I'm short over here. That's okay. You don't need to worry about that, because when you cut it down to the right size, you're going to be cutting off almost 1.5 inches, so that you don't have to worry about that. So the next thing, we need a wide piece again, because this is the branch that's coming off the main part of the tree. So I'm going to get my, I forgot, you don't have to cut every time, but I like to get a nice straight edge just to make sure. Where's my cutter? Here. Okay. Finger press, and then give it a good press. We're going to trim this up. And then you've got this last piece, and I don't even know if it's going to be worth it, because this, you can tell you've got all kinds of extra fabric. And the reason you've got all that extra fabric is because you've added all this extra fabric in. And I'm actually going to make this branch, I'm going to go in and make it a little, like I'm going to cut this part off. I'm going to make it a little more narrow, just because it's at the top of the tree, and I don't think it needs to be that fat. And it looks really weird, but it doesn't matter, because you'll see how much of this gets cut off. So we've got that part cut, and then we've got this to cut. Okay, so there's half of our tree. And again, don't worry about this over here, because when you trim this block up, you're probably going to wind up cutting off about this much. It'll probably come about right here. So don't worry about that uneven part. Okay, so here's, and again, I got my trunk, just we'll keep that in there just because that's what it's going to start looking like, okay? So now I've got to make my cuts and do my everything to the other side of the tree. So I always put them next to, and she even says in the instructions to do that as well. So on this one, I'm going to make another cut, but I'm going to go a little deeper, a little different. So there's one. And then I'm going to do one coming out here. And then I'm going to do another one from here. Okay. And I'll do one more coming down here at a different angle. And the thing that they talk about in the instructions, you don't want to make it too far out, because again, you're going to lose some of it. So I'm going to make this one like right here, more towards the inside than the outside edge. Okay, so again, I'm going to start here, and I'm going to lay this out for you. Let's get an idea. We're going to have this here, then we'll have a big one in here. So you kind of get the idea, another skinny one and then a big one. Yeah. So okay, we've got both sides of the branches done now, and this is kind of what your tree is going to look like. And you could see that it's not exactly the same size or whatever, but that doesn't matter. So I always sew this side first, so I made sure that I've got a straight edge here. Okay, this is almost the exact size, and if it wasn't, I could decide if I want this to go down or up, because you wind up trimming this down. But I'm kind of liking the way that tree's going to look. And this is where you can decide if you want this one to be a little higher, because you don't want these branches to be at the same place, or a little bit lower, because you do have some leeway. But I'm going to go ahead and sew this side of the tree trunk to my branches. And I'll be back with you as soon as I get the sewing done.
Go ahead.
So I've got one side sewn on, and I've got to decide if I want this one near there. And I think I'm going to raise it up just a little bit so it's not going to be exactly even. And I think that's where I want to go. So if I put a pin where I want, this just helps me. You've got choices, because this is your block, it's your tree. You can do it however you want. So I'm going to sew that seam, and I'll be back with you. So now I've got it, and I went ahead and pressed it with my iron, so I've got everything nice and flat. And right now, this is, you could tell it's off up here, and we've got some stuff missing. So it is measuring roughly like almost 11 inches wide, a little bit more down at the bottom. And let's see, you know, anywhere almost 16 inches. But you trim it down to, double check here because I want to make sure, 7.5 inches wide by 12.5 inches tall. So I've got to decide. I'm going to always cut my top off first, and I try and keep my, one of these is a little askew because that the trunk is not cut straight or whatever, but I've got my, so I'm going to go by this one, and I want to keep it upright like a 90, close to a 90-degree angle. So I'm going to trim and decide where I want to cut off, and I kind of like it right where this fabric is ending, but I'm going to try and cut using my cutting mat to try and get a good solid cut that's going to be, you know, 90-degree angle. So I'm going to cut here, okay? So that's going to be the top of my tree. Okay. And that's going to give me 12.5 inches. So all this winds up being extra. So all these edges, you know, and then what I do is I take my tree trunk down at the bottom, and I find the middle of that tree trunk, and I just give it a good finger press, okay? And remember, we want these at 7.5, so I want half of that. So I'm going to put where that fold is, you know, I just folded it, found the middle of the tree trunk, and I'm going to put that on an inch mark. Okay, so I need to cut, and so I've got it right here. So I chose the 15 inch. So I'm going to come over here, and I need to trim this to 3.75 inches, because that's half of 7.5 inches. And 1, 2, 3, and I'm right on 15. So that's going to give me the very center of my block, and I get to slice that off. So then here, again, I'm going to put that center right on the 15-inch mark. And I'm going to look for 3.75 from that 15. So I've got 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. So that's it. And that's going to give me my block. So here we are with the finished trees, and let's double check. I'll come over here, and we are 7.5 by 12.5. So there's my finished tree. So I hope that explains any of the issues that you might be having making this block. Don't be afraid, and like I said, if you have questions and you want to talk with me about it, you can always call the shop and ask for Birdie, and I will be glad to answer any of your questions. But there's tree number 1, and get all these loose threads out. And you know, we did the other video. We've already got our 3 gnomes, so this is going to start looking like something pretty soon, because I just got to do one more tree and our table runner will be done. So happy quilting, have fun, and if you have any issues, you can contact the shop, and I'll be more than happy to talk with you.